The night was filled with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses. Rich people dressed in glittering clothes moved around the grand ballroom, talking loudly and showing off their wealth. Near the back of the hall, a young waitress named Emily moved quietly from table to table. Her black and white uniform a little wrinkled from a long day, her hands steady even though she had worked since morning. She smiled politely when someone asked for another drink, but no one really looked at her. To them, she was just another server. Invisible in a room full of lights, Emily had worked at this hotel for almost 2 years. Ever since her father had fallen sick, she once dreamed of being a pianist. She had studied music at a small community college, but when the hospital bills came, she sold her piano and quit her classes. Now her life was about tips, trays, and tired feet. Still, every time she passed the grand piano in the corner of the ballroom, her eyes lingered for a second too long. She could almost hear the sound of her own fingers dancing on the keys again. As she placed a tray of glasses on the counter, she heard laughter nearby. A group of wealthy guests stood around a tall man in a sharp blue suit. His name was Mr. Lawson. He was one of the biggest donors at the event. Known for his arrogance and loud jokes, he enjoyed being the center of attention. Emily had seen his type before. Men who thought money gave them the right to laugh at others. He glanced at her as she walked by, his eyes sharp and amused. "Hey you," he called out, his voice carrying across the room. Emily froze for a second, unsure if he was talking to her. When he gestured toward her with a glass of wine in his hand, she walked over, trying to keep her tone polite. "Yes, sir?" she said softly. Mr. Lawson smiled in a way that made her stomach twist. "You used to play piano, didn't you?" he asked loudly enough for everyone around him to hear. Emily blinked, her heart jumping. I did, sir, a long time ago," she replied, wondering how he even knew that. One of the older waiters must have mentioned it, maybe in passing. Lawson chuckled. "Well, that's something, isn't it?" He said, "We have a beautiful piano right here. Maybe you can give us a little show." The people around him laughed. Thinking it was a joke, Emily felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear. "Oh, no, sir. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head. "I'm just here to serve tonight." But Lawson wasn't the type to let go. He looked at the crowd, pretending to be kind and encouraging. "Come on, folks. Let's see if our lovely waitress still remembers how to play." The laughter grew louder. Some guests clapped, urging her to go on. Others whispered behind their hands. Emily's cheeks burned. She felt small and out of place. The room seemed to spin as all eyes turned toward her. Inside her chest, her heart beat fast. She hadn't played in years, and her hands suddenly felt heavy. She looked toward the piano across the room, its glossy black surface shining under the golden lights. She could almost feel the keys under her fingers, the memories rushing back, the sound of her mother humming along when she practiced, her father smiling proudly before everything changed. Lawson smirked again, enjoying every second. "Don't be shy, dear, we don't bite," he said. The words dripping with fake kindness, Emily swallowed hard. Her throat dry, she could walk away. She could pretend she didn't hear him, but part of her refused to let this man have the last laugh. She straightened her shoulders, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, sir," she said. "If that's what you want." The laughter dimmed as she set her tray down and walked slowly toward the piano, her steps quiet against the marble floor. Every sound in the room seemed distant. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her. She sat down on the piano bench, her reflection shining faintly in the polished wood. For a moment she didn't move, her hands hovering above the keys, her breathing uneven. The room waited, some expecting her to fail, others simply curious. She looked up once, her gaze meeting Lawson's smirking face, then she turned back to the piano, her fingers resting gently on the keys. She hadn't played in so long, but the feeling never really left her. Deep inside, the music was still there, waiting to come out. Emily closed her eyes, her heart racing, and for the first time in years she whispered to herself, "Just play." The noise of the party faded away, the laughter, the whispers. Even Lawson's smug grin, all vanished as she pressed the first key, soft and trembling. Like the start of something she had long forgotten, the sound of the first note still echoed in Emily's mind as she walked home that night. The weight of humiliation pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy coat. She had managed to escape the moment by pretending she didn't remember how to play, and the crowd quickly lost interest, laughing and moving on to their champagne and gossip. But Lawson's smug face stayed with her, the way he looked at her like she was a toy to be mocked. It burned inside her chest the next morning. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of her small apartment, the kind of place where every sound from the street came right through the walls. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, tying her worn shoes. She could still hear the faint laughter from the night before. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was anger now. Quiet but steady, she whispered to herself. He thought it was funny, making me small in front of everyone. On her way to work, she passed by an old music store, its windows dusty, and its piano slightly out of tune. The sign said for sale, but no one seemed interested. She paused for a moment, staring at the keys through the glass, her reflection staring back at her. Tired but still alive, she stepped inside, the bell above the door ringing softly. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Geller, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Emily, I haven't seen you in ages," he said. He had been her piano teacher years ago before her life changed. "It's been a long time since you came in," he added kindly. "I just wanted to look," she said quietly, running her fingers across the edge of an old upright piano. The wood was scratched, but the keys still gleamed. "Do you still practice?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, not really," she whispered. "I haven't touched a piano since before everything, Mr." Geller sighed softly. "It's never too late. You know," he said. "Music doesn't leave you. It waits for you to come back." His words stayed with her as she left the shop. The idea that maybe, just maybe, she could still play that evening. The hotel manager told her there was another private event, a smaller gathering at Mr. Lawson's mansion. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard his name. She didn't want to go anywhere near him again. But refusing wasn't an option. She needed the work, so she nodded and agreed. The mansion was even more extravagant than the hotel ballroom. Chandeliers glittered above and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Emily carried trays of drinks through groups of laughing guests, trying to stay unnoticed, but fate had other plans. Halfway through the night, Lawson spotted her, his grin spreading like poison. "Well, look who it is," he said loudly, calling attention from nearby guests. "Our little pianist from the other night." His tone was playful, but his eyes held that same mocking spark. "You never did play us a tune, did you?" he added. Several people turned to look, amused. Emily tried to keep her head down. "I'm just working tonight, sir," she said politely, hoping he'd move on, but Lawson wasn't done. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "What's wrong? Afraid of a few notes? Or maybe you were lying about being able to play?" His words hit hard, but this time something inside Emily hardened. She straightened up, her voice calm but firm. "No, sir, I wasn't lying," she said. That caught his attention. His smirk faltered for a second. "Oh? Then prove it," he challenged, gesturing toward the grand piano in the corner of the room. The same type that had haunted her dreams for years. The crowd began to whisper again. Curiosity lighting their faces. For a moment she hesitated, her mind spinning. She could walk away again, pretend she didn't care. But she was tired of pretending, tired of being small, tired of letting people like him define her. So she took a slow breath and said, "All right." Lawson raised an eyebrow. "Really? You'll play?" he asked, surprised. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll play." The chatter in the room dimmed as Emily walked toward the piano, her steps steady and quiet. She sat down, her back straight, her fingers hovering above the keys. This time there was no fear, only focus. The room fell completely silent. All that existed was her, the piano, and the memory of what she had once loved. When her fingers pressed the first note, the sound was pure and trembling. Like a fragile heartbeat, the guests looked at one another, surprised by the sudden beauty. Then came the next note, and the next, the melody growing stronger, fuller, more alive. Lawson's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. The sound that filled the room wasn't that of a nervous waitress fumbling over keys. It was powerful, emotional. It told a story of struggle and grace, of pain and hope. The guests stood frozen, listening. In that moment, Emily wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't someone to be laughed at or pitied. She was the center of the room, her music washing over every person there. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving, she was seen. The final note of Emily's song still floated in the air when silence gripped the room. Not the kind of silence that came from politeness, but the kind that followed awe. Her fingers rested lightly on the piano keys. Her chest rising and falling, the crowd stared, unsure whether to clap or speak. For a moment, the world seemed to pause around her. Then someone began to applaud, slowly at first, then louder, until the whole room erupted with claps and cheers. Emily blinked in disbelief. She had expected laughter, maybe pity, but what she saw were faces filled with astonishment, admiration, even respect. People were smiling, not the cruel smiles from before, but genuine ones. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from emotion. She stood up, trying to step back quietly, but the applause only grew louder. Lawson sat there frozen in his chair, his wine glass untouched, the smirk he always wore gone from his face. His pride stung like a fresh wound. He forced a laugh, pretending it didn't matter, but everyone could see the color drain from his face. The same guests who once laughed at Emily now avoided his eyes. A few even whispered to each other. Shaking their heads, Emily bowed slightly, embarrassed by the attention, then returned to her work, her heart still racing. She picked up her tray and tried to focus, but people kept stopping her, thanking her for playing, complimenting her skill. One older woman in a sparkling silver gown touched her hand and said softly, "My dear, that was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard." Emily smiled shyly, whispering, "Thank you, ma'am." Before slipping away when the party ended, she slipped out of the mansion, the cool night air wrapping around her like a blanket. She walked home beneath the dim streetlights, her hands still warm from the keys, her heart full. It felt unreal. How a moment meant to humiliate her had turned into something powerful. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt proud of herself. The next morning, she woke up to a knock on her door. She rubbed her tired eyes and opened it to find her neighbor, a kind woman named Mrs. Hill, holding a newspaper. "Emily, dear, look at this," she said, her voice filled with excitement. Emily took the paper, confused. On the front page was a headline: "Waitress stuns Millionaire's guests with unbelievable piano performance." Below it was a blurry picture of her sitting at the piano, eyes closed, lost in music. Her hands trembled as she read the article. Someone at the party had recorded her performance and uploaded it online. Overnight, the video had gone viral. People everywhere were talking about the Waitress pianist. The comments were full of praise. Some called her an inspiration. Others demanded to know who she was. She laughed softly, half in disbelief, half in wonder. She hadn't even realized anyone had filmed it. She felt shy about the attention, but deep down there was a flicker of joy. She looked out the window, sunlight spilling across the street, and whispered, "Maybe this is just the beginning." Later that afternoon, while working another shift at the hotel, she heard someone call her name. She turned to see a well-dressed man in his 40s, standing by the reception desk. He smiled warmly and said, "You must be Emily." She nodded nervously. "Yes, sir, can I help you?" He handed her a card. "My name's Daniel Reeves. I'm a music producer," he said. "I was at Mr. Lawson's party last night, and I've been in this business for 20 years. But what I heard from you was something rare, something real." Emily stared at the card, unable to speak. "I'd like to meet with you," he continued. "We can discuss an opportunity if you're interested." Her heart leapt, but she tried to stay calm. "An opportunity?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said with a smile. "I believe the world should hear your music." Emily nodded slowly, still trying to process it all. She had gone from being a waitress people ignored to someone being offered a chance at the dream she'd buried long ago. After her shift, she held the card tightly in her hand as she walked home. That night, she sat by the window with an old notebook she used to write her music in. The pages yellowed, the ink faded. She flipped through it and smiled, the melodies she once loved returning to her mind. Outside, the city buzzed quietly, but in her small apartment, all she could hear was the echo of her own song, the one that changed everything. Meanwhile, across town, Lawson sat in his office, scrolling through his phone in disbelief. Every social media platform showed the same video. His party, his attempt to humiliate someone, and now he was the fool. Comments flooded in mocking him for his arrogance, calling Emily the girl who silenced the millionaire. He clenched his jaw, furious, but deep down a small part of him knew. He'd been beaten by Grace. For Emily, though, the night wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovery. She had found a part of herself that life had stolen, and as she looked out into the quiet streets, she whispered, maybe dreams don't die. Maybe they just wait. And in that small apartment, a soft smile formed on her face as she closed her notebook, ready for what tomorrow might bring. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the echo of her own music. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the hush that fell over the crowd, the stunned faces, the way Mr. Lawson's smug smile had vanished. It all felt like a dream. But the world outside was changing faster than she realized. By the next morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from friends, co-workers, even strangers, all saying the same thing. You're all over the internet. Her video had spread like wildfire, millions of views, thousands of comments calling her the piano waitress and the girl who silenced arrogance with music. She scrolled through the comments, her heart racing between shock and laughter. People were writing things like, "She plays like an angel," and "That millionaire got humbled real fast." At the hotel, everyone was talking about her. The staff clapped when she walked in. The chef grinned and said, "Looks like we're working with a celebrity now." Emily smiled shyly, but inside she was trembling. Fame wasn't something she ever wanted, yet somehow it had found her, and she didn't know what to do with it. Then just before her shift ended, the hotel manager approached her. "Emily, there's someone here to see you," he said. She frowned, confused. "Who?" she asked. "He says he's from the press," the manager replied, pointing toward the lobby. A tall man with a camera stood there, holding a microphone. "Miss Emily, could we have a few words?" he asked eagerly. "Your performance has touched hearts all over the world. What was going through your mind when you started to play?" Emily blinked, completely unprepared. She managed a nervous smile. I just wanted to play something honest," she said softly. "I didn't mean to make a scene, I just followed the music." Her answer went viral too. People called it humble and pure. That night, Emily's small apartment was filled with calls and messages. One stood out. It was from Daniel Reeves, the music producer who had approached her before. "Emily," his message read, "your video broke every record. I want to offer you a spot in our upcoming charity concert. 1 week from now." She read the message twice before whispering, "A concert?" Her hand shook as she replied with a simple yes. "I'd be honored." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Daniel arranged rehearsals at a music studio downtown. Emily hadn't been in a professional space like that in years. The polished floors, the scent of wood and polish, the feel of the grand piano beneath her hands. It all came rushing back. At first she felt out of place, surrounded by talented musicians and bright lights. But Daniel encouraged her gently. "You belong here, Emily. Your music doesn't just sound beautiful, it feels beautiful." Meanwhile, word of the concert spread fast. Newspapers and talk shows began covering her story. The headline read, "From Waitress to Wonder, the girl whose music silenced a millionaire." Lawson, on the other hand, was furious. His friends teased him relentlessly, and the media painted him as the villain in Emily's story. He tried to downplay it, calling it a misunderstanding, but the damage was done. His name was now linked to her rise. The night of the concert arrived. The venue was packed. Bright lights illuminated the stage, and the audience buzzed with excitement. Emily stood backstage in a simple white dress, her heart pounding. She peeked through the curtain and froze. In the front row sat Mr. Lawson, dressed in black. His expression unreadable. She swallowed hard. "Why is he here?" she whispered to Daniel. He smiled faintly. "Maybe he wants to hear what humility sounds like." When her name was announced, the crowd cheered. Emily walked onto the stage, her palms sweating. But when she sat at the piano and the first spotlight fell on her, everything else disappeared. She began to play, not the same song as before, but something new, soft, emotional, powerful. Her music told the story of her struggle, her fear, her rediscovery, each note weaving into the next like a confession. The audience listened in silence, tears glistened in many eyes. Even Lawson leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes softening as the music washed over him. Emily wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply freeing her heart through melody, and that truth hit everyone in the room. When the final note faded, the hall erupted into thunderous applause. A standing ovation. Daniel smiled proudly from the wings. Emily stood and bowed, her heart light. She caught Lawson's gaze for a brief second. He clapped too. Slow but sincere, his arrogance melted away, replaced with quiet respect. That night, as Emily stepped off stage, Daniel said, "You just changed your life." She laughed softly, her eyes shining. "No," she replied. "I just remembered who I am." And in that moment, she knew her story wasn't about humiliation or revenge anymore. It was about grace, courage, and the power of staying true to what the world tried to take away. After the concert, everything in Emily's life began to change. It felt like she had stepped into someone else's dream, one she didn't even dare to imagine for herself. Her name spread across social media. News channels ran clips of her performance, And the video of her playing at the charity gala reached millions. People called her the waitress with the golden hands. She was invited to morning shows, interviews and music events, but through it all, Emily stayed humble, still showing up early to her hotel shifts, still helping her co-workers, still smiling quietly when people recognized her in the street. One day, as she was serving coffee at the hotel lounge, her manager approached with a grin. "Emily, there's a guest asking for you," he said. She turned to find a man in a tailored suit sitting by the window. It was Mr. Lawson, the same man who had once mocked her. She froze for a second, unsure how to react. He stood up slowly, clearing his throat. "Miss Emily," he said, his tone softer than before. "May I have a moment of your time?" She nodded cautiously and sat across from him, her heart steady but curious. He seemed smaller now, not in size, but in presence. His usual arrogance replaced with something close to shame. "I came to apologize," he began quietly. "What I did that night was wrong, cruel even. And I've had to live with that moment replaying in my head ever since." Emily listened silently. Her eyes calm, he went on. "You didn't just prove me wrong. You reminded me that respect isn't measured by wealth, but by character." She was silent for a moment before answering softly. "It wasn't about proving you wrong. Mr. Lawson," she said, "I just wanted to play." He nodded, looking down. "And you did, better than anyone I've ever heard," he said with a faint smile. Then reached into his briefcase and handed her an envelope. "I made a donation in your name to the local music school, the same one that closed down last year. They're reopening it with your name on one of the classrooms." Emily blinked in shock, her throat tightening. "You didn't have to," she began, but he shook his head. "No, I needed to," he said. "It's the least I could do." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sunlight reflected off the glass table between them. Two people from completely different worlds connected by one unexpected melody. When Lawson left, Emily sat quietly, staring at the envelope in her hands. She realized forgiveness didn't come from pride. It came from understanding, and in that moment, she forgave him not for him but for herself that evening. She visited the reopened music school. Children ran through the halls, their laughter echoing through the old rooms. The smell of polished wood and chalk brought back memories on one of the classroom doors. A brass plaque read, "The Emily Carter Music Room, dedicated to those who never stopped believing." Her fingers brushed over the letters, her eyes misty. Inside she found an old upright piano, similar to the one she had practiced on years ago. She sat down, her reflection shining faintly in the glossy lid. Slowly, she began to play, a gentle tune full of warmth and peace. Some of the children gathered by the door, peeking in. She smiled and gestured for them to come closer. "Do you want to learn?" she asked. Their eager nods made her laugh softly. "Then let's start," she said as days passed. Emily started volunteering at the school, teaching music in her free time. Her story inspired not just the kids, but the entire town. She became a symbol of hope, of resilience, of quiet strength. People came from nearby cities just to meet her, to tell her how her music had touched their hearts. One afternoon, while teaching a young girl named Lily, Emily noticed the child struggling with her hand placement. "Don't force the notes," she said gently. "Let them come to you." Lily tried again, and the melody began to flow. Emily smiled, hearing the familiar spark, the same one she once carried. "Perfect," she whispered. Meanwhile, Daniel Reeves, her producer, had bigger plans. He approached her after class one day with a wide grin. "Emily, we've received an offer from the National Symphony," he said. "They want you to perform as a guest artist next season." She stared at him in disbelief. "Me?" she asked. "Yes, you," he replied, laughing. "The world's already fallen in love with your story. Now it's time they fall in love with your music." That night, Emily sat by her window, city lights flickering in the distance. She thought about the journey, how it all began with humiliation, fear, and pain, yet led her here, to something beautiful. She whispered to herself. Sometimes life plays a cruel tune before it gives you a masterpiece. Far away, Lawson watched one of her televised interviews, his face somber but peaceful. He smiled faintly when she mentioned forgiveness and kindness. He raised his glass softly toward the screen and murmured, "Bravo, Miss Emily," and as her music filled homes and hearts across the world, Emily's story became more than just a viral moment. It became a lesson, a reminder that even in the harshest spotlight, true grace will always outshine cruelty, and sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's rising higher than anyone ever expected. The next morning, the world seemed different for Emily. The air felt lighter, her steps easier, yet her mind buzzed with thoughts she couldn't quiet. Every newspaper headline, every interview, every message online repeated her name. The waitress who humbled a millionaire. The woman who played her pain into beauty, but inside, she still felt like the same girl who used to sneak a few minutes on the old piano after her shifts. Her life had changed, but she hadn't let fame change her heart still. There was something deeper stirring inside her, a longing to do more, not for herself but for others like her. People who had dreams but no chance to chase them. People who worked in silence, unseen. One afternoon, Emily was invited to speak at a local college's music department. Hundreds of students gathered in the auditorium, many of them young, nervous, unsure about their futures. She walked onto the stage in her simple blue dress. No makeup, no sparkle, just sincerity. The room went quiet as she smiled gently. "I'm not here to talk about fame," she began softly. "I'm here to talk about the moment I almost gave up." Her voice carried a quiet strength. "You see, life didn't take my dream all at once. It stole it piece by piece, first my time, then my confidence. Then my piano," she said. "But music never stopped waiting for me." The students listened. Captivated, she told them about the night Mr. Lawson mocked her, about the humiliation, and about the moment she decided to play anyway. "It wasn't courage that made me sit down at that piano," she said. "It was exhaustion. I was tired of being small, and I realized the only way to silence mockery is to let your truth speak louder." When she finished, the hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the loud, shallow kind. It was the sound of hearts moved, inspired after the talk. Students lined up to meet her. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to thank her for reminding them not to quit. That night, Emily sat by her window again, watching city lights blink in rhythm like notes on a sheet of music. She thought about her journey, how everything that once hurt her had somehow become her greatest strength. Her phone buzzed. It was Daniel Reeves, her producer. He texted, "We've been invited to perform in Paris next month. The Philharmonic wants you to open the event." She gasped, her hands trembling. Paris, the city of art, of music, of dreams. She stared at the message for a long moment before replying simply, "Yes." Weeks later, Emily found herself walking through the grand halls of the Paris Conservatoire. Marble floors glimmering under chandeliers, her heart raced. She remembered the girl who once couldn't afford a bus ticket to her music exam. Now she was about to perform in one of the most prestigious venues in the world. She took a deep breath, whispering to herself, "Dad, I wish you could see this." When the night arrived, the hall was filled with people from all around the world. Critics, artists, musicians, and ordinary listeners who had been touched by her story. Emily stepped onto the stage, the grand piano gleaming under soft light. She sat down, her fingers trembling slightly, but when she looked up, she saw faces waiting, listening, and suddenly the fear disappeared. She began to play, her melody rising and falling like waves, delicate yet powerful. Her music painted pictures of a tired waitress, a cruel millionaire, a night of courage, a second chance and forgiveness. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story told without words, a confession of everything she'd endured and overcome. Halfway through, she felt tears slide down her cheek, but she didn't stop. She let them fall, letting her heart speak through every note. When the final chord echoed, the audience rose to their feet. Clapping, cheering, crying, she stood, bowing with quiet grace. Afterward, backstage, Daniel hugged her tightly. "You did it," he whispered. "You didn't just play. You healed people." Emily smiled through tears. "Maybe that's what music is supposed to do," she said. "It doesn't fix the past, but it makes the pain worth something." Later that night, Emily stood alone on the balcony of her hotel, the Eiffel Tower glittering in the distance, the wind cool on her face. She thought about how everything had begun, with one cruel man and one forgotten piano. She closed her eyes and smiled, whispering into the night, "Sometimes the world tries to bury you, but it forgets you're a seed." And with that thought, Emily knew her story was far from over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Paris still glowed in her mind like a living dream. But Emily didn't rest. While others saw fame and glory, she saw responsibility. Her story had reached millions, but what mattered most to her were the people who still felt small, unseen, and unheard. She wanted to help them find their own melody. After returning home, she was greeted at the airport by reporters, fans, and flashes of cameras. They shouted questions. "Emily, How does it feel to be an international star? What's next for you? She smiled politely, answering softly, It feels like I'm finally where the music wanted me to be. But deep inside, she already knew what was next. She wasn't chasing applause anymore, she was chasing purpose. The first thing she did was visit the music school again. The little room with her name on the plaque felt different now. Brighter, fuller. She sat at the old upright piano and played a few soft notes. Children peeked through the doorway, smiling shyly. You came back, one of them said. Emily laughed. Of course I did, she replied. I always keep my promises. That evening, she called Daniel Reeves. Daniel, she said. I want to start something bigger, something that lasts. He listened. Intrigued, what do you have in mind? He asked. Emily smiled. A foundation, she said. For kids who love music but don't have the means, I want to give them instruments, lessons, opportunities, everything I didn't have when I needed it most. Daniel paused for a moment, then said warmly, That's the best idea I've heard all year. And just like that, the Emily Carter Music Foundation was born. Donations poured in from fans around the world, and within months, classrooms were built, pianos delivered, and new programs launched. The first concert hosted by the foundation featured performances by children from poor neighborhoods. Their songs filled the air with hope. During that concert, Emily didn't play the piano. Instead, she sat among the audience, tears in her eyes as she watched a little girl play Claire de Lune with trembling hands. She recognized the same fear, the same spark she once had when the girl finished. Emily stood up first and clapped until her palms stung. The girl looked up and smiled, the same shy, proud smile Emily had once worn in the weeks that followed. Emily began receiving letters from around the world, handwritten notes from strangers, mothers, teachers, and young dreamers. One read, I was about to give up on my art, but then I saw your story. Now I'm trying again. Another said, My daughter watched your video every night before her piano lessons. You changed her life. Emily read each one carefully. Saving them in a wooden box she called her Music of Hearts. One day, while sorting through the letters, she found one without a return address. Inside was a single line written in elegant handwriting. Some lessons come the hard way. Thank you for mine. There was no signature, but she didn't need one. She smiled faintly. Knowing it came from Mr. Lawson, he had kept his distance, but his small acts of atonement continued. She later learned he had funded several music scholarships quietly, using no publicity, no announcements, just quiet generosity. People change, she thought. When they're humbled by truth, months passed, and the foundation grew beyond what Emily ever dreamed. Music schools opened in different cities under her name, and her concerts were now more than performances. They were celebrations of second chances. She no longer played to impress, she played to connect. One evening, she was invited to perform at a global charity event broadcast live. As she sat at the grand piano, she took a moment to breathe, looking out at the thousands of faces before her. She thought about the girl she used to be, the tired waitress, humiliated, small, forgotten, and she whispered quietly, You made it. Then she began to play, but this time, the music was not about sorrow or pain, it was about joy, rebirth, and grace. Each note sparkled like sunlight breaking through clouds. The melody rose, carrying her story across the hall, across screens, across hearts. When the performance ended, the crowd stood, but Emily didn't bow. Instead, she looked up at the sky through the open ceiling of the venue. The stars shining above, she felt her father's presence, his voice in her memory. Play, Emily. The world listens to truth. After the show, she stepped outside into the night air, away from cameras and lights. The city hummed softly around her. She smiled to herself, realizing her journey had never really been about fame or revenge. It was about finding her way back to her heart. And as she walked down the quiet street, the distant sound of a piano drifted through an open window. A child practicing, a few notes wrong, a few right but full of hope. Emily stopped, listening with a smile, her eyes soft with tears. She whispered, That's the sound of tomorrow, and kept walking into the night. Her story now a melody the world would never forget. Years later, the world knew Emily Carter not just as the waitress who played the piano, but as the woman who turned humiliation into harmony. Her name had become a symbol of perseverance. Her music taught in classrooms, her story told in documentaries, yet to her, none of it mattered as much as the sound of children laughing in her music schools, pressing piano keys with wonder in their eyes. She had traveled the world by now, London, Tokyo, Vienna, and Rome, but no city ever replaced the little town where her story began. One autumn afternoon, she returned there quietly, wearing no makeup, no designer clothes, just a soft smile and a notebook under her arm. She walked down the same street she once hurried through, carrying trays in exhaustion. The town looked smaller now, but its heartbeat was still the same. The old hotel where she once worked still stood, though it had changed owners. The grand ballroom, where everything had started, was now used for weddings and events. She stood at the entrance for a long while, memories flooding back, the laughter, the humiliation, the trembling hands over the piano keys, and then, the music that changed her life. A staff member recognized her and gasped, "You're her, Miss Carter." She said, "Would you like to come in?" "We'd be honored." Emily nodded softly and followed her inside. The room looked brighter now. The same chandelier sparkled above, but it no longer held the weight of shame, only light. In the corner still sat a piano, polished, elegant, waiting. Emily approached it slowly. Her fingertips brushing the smooth wood, she sat down, the faint echo of that long-ago night whispering in her ears. For a moment she said nothing. Then, with a faint smile, she began to play. The melody that filled the air wasn't sorrowful anymore. It was warm, peaceful, full of gratitude, the song of someone who had learned that pain can give birth to beauty. The hotel staff and guests gathered around, some recording on their phones, but she didn't care. She wasn't performing. She was remembering, forgiving, healing. When the last note faded, the room was silent, and Emily whispered softly, "That was for the girl who thought she wasn't enough." As she stood to leave, an elderly man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, leaning on a cane. It was Mr. Lawson, older now, his hair gray, his face lined with regret. He removed his hat and said quietly, "Miss Carter." She turned, surprised but calm. "Mr. Lawson," she greeted him. He smiled faintly. "I've come a long way to see this moment," he said. "I wanted to thank you for teaching me what kindness truly looks like." Emily smiled gently. "You already thanked me years ago," she said. "By changing who you became." His eyes glistened. "I'm still trying," he admitted. She nodded. "That's enough," she replied. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people forever connected by one fateful night. Not by hatred or revenge, but by transformation. After he left, Emily walked outside into the golden sunset. The town's church bells ringing in the distance. Children ran past her laughing. One of them carried a small music book under his arm. She stopped him with a kind smile. "Do you play?" she asked. He nodded proudly. "I'm learning," he said. "One day I'll play just like you." Emily laughed softly, her eyes bright. "Then promise me something," she said. "Play from your heart, not for applause." The boy nodded seriously before running off. That evening she sat on a park bench overlooking the quiet town, the trees rustling gently, the air smelling of autumn leaves. She opened her old notebook, the one she used to carry when life was heavy, and began writing her final piece. Not for fame, not for an audience, but for peace. She called it the Waitress's Waltz. In her mind, she could already hear it, the delicate blend of struggle and triumph, of tears turned into strength, the music of survival, and as she wrote, a tear slid down her cheek, not from sadness, but from completion. Months later, that final piece was performed by her students at the grand opening of the newest branch of her foundation. The performance was broadcast across the world, and people wept at its beauty. No one knew it was written as a farewell, but those who listened closely could feel it, a quiet goodbye from a soul that had finally healed. Years after her passing, her piano was placed in the very same ballroom where it all began. A plaque beside it read, "Here sat a girl the world tried to mock. She answered not with anger, but with music, and sometimes late at night. When the hotel was empty and the air still, guests swore they could hear faint notes drifting through the hall, soft and full of light, as if Emily herself was still there, playing her story one last time, reminding the world that dignity, kindness, and courage can turn even cruelty into a song." Her legacy became a timeless melody, one that whispered to every broken heart,